Welcome to Straight Up, brought to you by Peak Prosperity, which values context, curiosity, and learning that leads to action. Reading from his latest works and expanding on current events in the economy, energy, and environment, it is my pleasure to introduce your host, Dr. Chris Martinson.
Welcome, everyone, to this edition of Straight Up. Today, we're going to be discussing the importance of a resilient life. You know, in the end, it's going to make all the difference. This is a piece that I posted on September 20th, 2019. Got my coffee. I'm ready to go. You know, my business partner, Adam, and I, we recently met with a very successful business owner whose career began on Wall Street. And he's the kind of guy, really, who should be rooting for the system. It's treated him really very well. And instead, he was kind of nervous about the sustainability of the status quo. He said, you know what? Starting in August, I don't know, maybe it was the Amazon catching fire, maybe it was the negative interest rates. I don't know for certain what the trigger was, but something snapped. Well, that's what he said, and I agree because I feel it too, and I think you do too, as do so many others. And it's not just those who regularly read peakprosperity.com. Increasingly, even mainstream voices are starting to report a profound sense that something really isn't right, that from the economy to geopolitics to the natural world, things are swiftly worsening. Public perception is beginning to shift from complacency to fear. Countries are fast rejecting globalization in favor of nationalization. The holes in our ecosystem, vanishing birds, insects, amphibians, fish stocks, they're really becoming frighteningly obvious, impossible to ignore anymore. The threats to life as we're accustomed to it are becoming more visible while accelerating in both magnitude and frequency. Now, I expounded on the danger of that in my recent report titled, "It's the Pace of Change That Kills You." Negative developments can spark their own vicious cycles. The more components of a system that fail, the more at risk the remaining components become. Now, that report was published just a couple of weeks ago, and since then, the world's largest oil refinery, the Abqaiq refinery in Saudi Arabia, was attacked by hostile forces, as yet unknown who, and knocked out of commission, throwing the future integrity of the global oil market into question. Now, look, I'm certain that they're going to repair that facility, but we're also certain now that relatively inexpensive, easily obtained drones and other component parts can be put together by almost anybody, I guess, with a little bit of skill and do major damage. So that throws everything into question. Scientists just last week announced that in North America, 29% of the total bird population, a drop of 3 billion birds, has been recorded in just the past half century. If we said that 50 years ago there were 3 billion people in the world, that'd be like waking up today and finding out that there were only 2 billion people in the world instead of 7.8. It's just a massive, massive destruction of the bird population. And Houston just suffered through another devastating round of, quote time, 500-year flooding due to another stalled storm system. This time just a tropical depression, but it stalled and dumped as much as 40 inches of rain in some spots. It's amazing. So you put all those things together, and to me, the pace of change is speeding up. Well, welcome to living in an exponential world. We're trying to cram an exponential economy, an exponential financial system, exponential human population growth. We're trying to do all that on a finite planet. That's the story that's coming to an end. And not many people get that, and that's why it creates anxiety. Because if you don't know what the story is, the unknown, you know, is a kid lying in your bed, that dark closet where you didn't know if what was in there or not, that was more fearful than if something was right in front of you. So that unknown aspect, a lot of people get that now. Our mission at Peak Prosperity is to create a world worth inheriting. We've been at it for a decade. Honestly, who knows if we'll succeed? You know, so far, we're failing, right? I just put that straight up front. You know, the odds were never really in our favor, of course. You know, a couple guys with a website and a message, but we're trying our hardest regardless. And we're being joined by a growing chorus of scientists and thoughtful people like you who observe that despite our best efforts, all of us, ours and everybody else in this story, the predicaments the world faces have only grown larger and more intractable, which is why we've long been so focused on promoting resilience. Resilience gives you the capability to absorb blows, bounce back quickly from insults, and it's what nature teaches us. Now, as the systems we're accustomed to begin to fail in earnest, the exact repercussions, impossible to predict, with any certainty, of course. Resilience, now that will be the key to who perseveres or even prospers in this next period of time versus those who get steamrolled. Now, we've done our best to serve as visible models for how to live a resilient life. We've personally ejected ourselves from the rat race. We relocated our families to areas rich in community and resources, boosted our health and fitness, grown a percentage of our food, lessened our dependence on fossil fuels, and developed many practical skills. And along the way, we've helped thousands of people become more resilient too. And like us, they've discovered that being more resilient means more than that. It means also being more alive, freer, in control of our destinies, more connected to the people around us, just many benefits. Personally, intimately ready for whatever may come. We counsel at the household and local community levels and across many dimensions, including financially, physically, emotionally, and we don't work from the top down because we've observed that throughout history, nothing really of importance ever got initiated at the top down, right? Think about something that was a true challenge and then ultimately a change in the status quo. Think about it, right? What do you got? Well, you got the environmental movement. Well, that was brought kicking and screaming from the outside in. How about civil rights? Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. No question about that. Women's rights? Yep, that too. Labor rights? Oh, you bet. A lot of blood shed over that too. So everything that represented an actual change had to start from the outside in. So that's where we begin in this story. If I know a lot of people believe that if we could just elect the right person or tweak a few policies or maybe we need some unified global, national, international response to these things, that's where we start. Good for those people. Glad they're out there believing that. I don't hold that view. Change starts at the outside, and we have to model that first, right? What good does it do to be out agitating for change to happen if you haven't already undertaken that change yourself? You're like, yeah, government, go ahead and make my life be different than it already is. Me and thousands of other people think that's the right way to go. I don't understand that. You start first and then you model it. And when enough people are already heading up a certain hill with a flag, eventually when they get close to the top of that hill, you'll find politicians racing up quickly from behind, grabbing the flag and running the last 3 feet and declaring victory. Because that's how it works. That's what I've seen. If you have other models of that, let me know. So becoming financially resilient, big part of this story, because why? Bubbles burst. And when they do, lots of people get hurt. Jobs are lost, savings plundered, homes foreclosed on, dreams diminished. Well, after the dot-com bubble and the housing bubble, here we are again, now nearly a decade into the everything bubble, and signs abound that it's in the process of popping. The number one question we are asked is, how do I avoid becoming collateral damage in this story? Another way is asking that is, what should I do? Well, we counsel a few things financially. First, everyone should immediately focus on living within or even beneath their financial means, as those overextended and over-indebted will be the first casualties of the next recession. Those looking for helpful tips should read our recent report on extreme frugality. This section that I'm going through right now, if you go to the website at peakprosperity.com, this part is just loaded with links because these are all really big, meaty pieces that we've written and talked about before. Next, developing multiple income streams. Really extremely important to financial resilience. Nothing quite as shaky as having 100% of your income come from a single paycheck. So if that paycheck goes away, you're in trouble. Now, there are many ways to go about doing this, right? You can own businesses, side businesses. You could have income yielding stocks and bonds, annuities, royalties, etc. or maybe simply renting out part of your home on Airbnb or starting an eBay side hustle. We especially like real estate as a vehicle for passive income given the tax advantages currently on offer. And so you could read our primer on investing for inflation adjusting income. You could also watch our video series on how to invest in real estate for safety and profit to learn more. Next, ensure that the financial wealth that you've accumulated doesn't evaporate when the current asset bubbles, yes, that's a plural word, bubbles, burst, right? If your money is in paper wealth like stocks, bonds, 401ks, trusts, we highly recommend that you have it managed by competent professionals who understand the actual key risks involved. If you're having trouble finding one, consider scheduling a free portfolio review with a financial advisory firm we endorsed. And one of my regular personal highlights in my life is hearing back from people just how pleased they are with the excellent personalized service provided by these very high integrity professionals. And if you've got money sitting in a bank like a savings account or a CD or a checking account, then please do yourself a favor and explore opening a Treasury Direct account. That means you're putting money directly with the U.S. Treasury. You're getting a higher yield, of course, and you also safeguard it against potential bank failures. You'd have to read that whole report. Again, the link at the site to really understand the full dimensions of that. But it's very easy to do. Doesn't take any time at all to set up these accounts, and they work great. Now, sadly, in this era of unprecedented money printing and market interventions, all of us need to take some precautions around the prospect that the serial bubble blowers at the central banks don't actually know what they're doing, which is why educating yourself about what's really happening and why, that's essential. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the financial and economic information out there is just marketing copy, maybe even propaganda. It's designed to prevent you, actually, from figuring out what's actually going on. History has shown us that those who don't think for themselves are going to pay the highest price. The dot-com bubble decimated the portfolios of those who had invested, air quotes, in ridiculous internet schemes that were clear and obvious money losers at every stage of their brief lifetimes. The housing bubble forced investors to finally admit in retrospect that maybe lending hairdressers from Las Vegas enough money to accumulate 19 homes wasn't a good idea. Hey, looking back on these things, no problem. We can say, yeah, that was dumb. But here we are in bubble 3, the everything bubble. And we have plenty of people investing, air quote time, merrily and happily in companies that are burning billions of dollars annually, owning trillions upon trillions of dollars of negative yielding debt, and living in houses that are even more expensive now than they were at the peak of the 2007 housing bubble. I just articulated, we have stock bubble there, we got a bond bubble, we got a housing bubble. That's why it's the everything bubble. It's everywhere. It's so extreme that a company even put this next statement right into its initial public offering filing, right? And still managed to find oodles of willing, excited investors on opening day. Here's the quote. "We have a history of net losses, and we may not be able to achieve or maintain profitability in the future." That was Lyft in their March 2019 filing. Can you believe that? We have a history of net losses, and we may not be able to achieve or maintain profitability in the future. Yeah, and people signed up, and the IPO went up 100% almost on the opening day because people were just so excited to get a piece of that action, right? Come on. I mean, can you imagine this? That stock price should have been slaughtered immediately. Shouldn't have even gone to IPO. Instead, it went up like a rocket on opening day of trading. And it's since retreated a little bit from that price, but the market still values this perpetual money-losing machine at more than $13 billion. Do you remember the South Sea bubble? I wrote about it a lot. It's in the crash course. In 1720 in England, there was such a frenzy around the share prices of the South Sea Company that dozens of ridiculous schemes popped up all around it in that ecosystem of craziness, including one company that was going to make cannons that shot square cannonballs, and one that even raised thousands of pounds, which was a lot of money at the time, promising this: for carrying on an undertaking of great advantage, but no one to know what it is. That's the Lift statement in 2019, but it was in 1720. 300 years, nothing's changed. Those 2 years have a lot in common, 1720 and 2019. Let's advance it forward to 2020. Anyway, craziness, right? You know why? You know why they have so much in common? Because bubbles are bubbles and humans are humans. It has nothing to do with, oh, we're more sophisticated now. And I understand that the market manipulators at the plunge protection team, in the U.S. Treasury, in the financial system, central banks, the big banks, they've got really excellent tools at their disposal with this computer algorithm-driven ecosystem of wanging prices around wherever they want to do. But what they can't do is they can't repeal the basic economic laws, which say that at the end of the day, there kind of has to be some value there somewhere. And if it's an undertaking of great advantage that no one to know is what it is, right? That's no different from saying, we've got this whole machine that allows us to market and promote and pimp and get excitement and put propaganda out around this company called Lyft, who wrote in their IPO prospectus, we have a history of net losses and we may not be able to achieve or maintain profitability in the future, and still get billions and billions and billions of dollars to flow towards that enterprise. Nothing's changed here. Nothing's changed at all. So we want you to be protected from that. That's why we lay out this idea. Listen, when these things burst, it's really painful. And when that happens, a lot of people lose their jobs, savings get eroded, all that stuff. So that's why we said, look, have your money be managed so it's not in things like Lyft. Make sure that you understand what the risks are, including the counterparty risks, things like bail-in, bank failures, stuff like that. Make sure that you're protected against those. Make sure you have multiple income streams and begin living as frugally as you can while you can so that you can accumulate whatever wealth you can. And of course, gold and silver. You got to have your money in gold and silver and in real estate, hard assets. That's really the ultimate prescription here, is to move into hard assets as much as possible, because that's what happens. The pendulum swings. It's all the way over there where there's billions and billions of dollars for money-losing companies. And eventually that pendulum swings back and people reorient themselves and reacquaint themselves with the philosophy that value is tangible and you can point to it and you can understand it and it actually exists. So that's where hard assets always tend to come back into vogue. They will again. They always do. Becoming physically resilient too. This is a big part that's captured my attention lately. I sent out an alert 2 weeks ago, and this is building on that idea, and a lot of energy is coming into this idea. So money, for sure, important, but simply having money doesn't mean you're resilient, of course. In fact, some of the richest people I know are also some of the most vulnerable and some of the most scared and some of the most worried. Because if all you have is money, you really haven't got anything at all. Everybody should be actively working to make their home more resilient. Absolutely. Some of the very best returning investments you can make are in improvements in your homestead, like solar hot water. Great returns on investment on that. Insulating your home, decent returns there. And otherwise finding ways to invest now and pay less later. If you live in the northern hemisphere, now is the time to be putting your garden to bed, layering on the straw and compost and grass clippings that are going to ensure richer soil next season. If you're in the southern hemisphere, spring has arrived, and it's time to begin waking your gardens up. For those without a well-prepared homestead, a solid group of Peak Prosperity members and I are now actively exploring creating a new planned real estate community that will be optimized for resilience. Now look, we don't know exactly what this is going to look like yet, whether it will be something along the lines of an intentional neighborhood, people living in reasonable proximity to each other, or something a little bit bolder maybe, where each person brings a skill and we organize more fully around the idea of community self-sufficiency. And it's shocking how many people have reached out to me since I launched that idea to express their interest in this project. So many folks are hungry for a better way to live. As an aside, we had the podcast with Sebastian Junger, wrote the book Tribe. And that book centered on the idea that he had been embedded with as a war correspondent with a lot of troops, and he was very frontline, very bold correspondent. He was in the front line in Afghanistan, places like Kandahar province and things like that. And then he comes back from that experience and runs across that statistic that 22 veterans a day are committing suicide, and decides to write about it, and went into that project thinking that what he was going to find was that these were 22 veterans who had experienced really awful war conditions, maybe, had, really traumatic brain injuries or experiences watching friends die, something. They'd seen combat, were getting maybe poor treatment through the VA system, and became despondent and killed themselves. That was what he was expecting to find. To his great surprise, he discovered that out of those 22, 11, half, had never even seen combat at all. So, wait, what's this all about? Why would so many military people be at risk, even those who hadn't seen combat? And the answer, to cut to the chase, you should listen to that podcast, great podcast, because he lays it all out. The answer was that they'd experienced such a sense of meaning and purpose in esprit de corps as they were embedded within whatever their unit size was, that when they came home and just landed at LAX or got dropped off at Newark Airport, you come out of that experience of being part of a tribe where your input mattered. And if you didn't do your job, real consequences emerged for the people around you. So you were needed. And come back into a place where nobody needs you. Heck, people, you have to convince people to even want to be in association with you, because we live in a culture where if somebody doesn't like you, they can just close their door and that's the end of that. You don't have to interact anymore. So it was that that coming back to such a defective, shallow, unsubstantial culture was so jarring that for many of these veterans, the more rational approach for them in their mind was to take their life than to put up with this culture, right? So that's a pretty damning indictment of the culture, you got to admit, right? Like people would rather die than live in it. I think that's as bad as it gets. So that's what we're saying. When you say people are hungry for a better way to live, it isn't just that we're worried about food availability in the future, or that things might get tougher because the economy might crash a little, or whatever those fears are, those worries. Yes, I think there are things we should be doing about being more self-sufficient and responsible for ourselves and our outcomes. Absolutely. And there's a better way to live out there. There's a more tribal aspect that we can reignite for ourselves, because that's how we're wired. That's our human DNA blueprint. That's what it's there for. It's telling us that we want to belong. We want to know that we matter. We want to have a sense of meaning and purpose in our actions. And we want our actions to contribute to something that will outlive us. And that's about creating that world worth inheriting too. So the answer could be to live among your resilient tribe. As humans, we all yearn to belong. We all want to know that life matters, that our own lives actually have some meaning, some purpose. But at turbulent times like these, meaning and purpose, they take on additional importance. They demand our attention, right? The more out of balance things become, the more important it becomes that our efforts matter. Now, a while back, I put out a podcast titled Living with Integrity. It proved really extremely popular, and I got some great feedback from many of you around that one. Its core message was this: our political, financial, corporate, and educational institutions are breaking their promises to us. Rather than serve our interests, they're constricting them. For example, pharmaceutical companies, maybe they started out with a noble intention of saving and improving lives, but now all the major companies are guilty of major abuses, really horrible stuff. Some have addicted millions to opiates. Others have bankrupted patients by jacking up costs beyond anything that could possibly be justified. Also, they could make a few more bucks for their executives. Big Ag, similarly complicit. It promoted and now uses neonicotinoid pesticides because they're cheaper, more cost-effective, at the expense of killing off a huge percentage of our once vibrant insect and bird populations. You know why? Hey, make a few more bucks. Jeffrey Epstein died under unbelievable circumstances, and now virtually nothing is happening on that investigation. The rules of law and justice for victims are being gutted, all to protect those in power who might be implicated or embarrassed were this to go to trial. So it's time for good people of impeccable character, people like you, to recognize that the current system is neither sustainable, which it really isn't, nor actually worth preserving in its current low integrity form. We can do better than this, right? So we're not talking about creating a community somewhere that's just sort of a fractal representation of what we already got, because we might look at what we already got and say, not worth preserving. We can do better than this. We could create maybe a culture that's rich enough that people would look at it and say, nah, I'd rather kill myself when they look at it. I'm not recreating that, No, not a chance. We can do better. So rather than deluding ourselves and squandering precious time waiting for the government to fix things, which I don't think it's gonna, we're far better served by taking destiny into our own hands. Truthfully, there's just not a lot worth preserving in the current culture of isolation, meaningless jobs, spending all our time, zoning out on screens and Netflix and stuff like that. People are hungry for more. And if you're like Adam and me, you want your life to matter. You want to live with purpose, integrity, happiness. Now that's the end of part 1. In part 2, for subscribers, called Resilient Relocation, I share the process for the intentional community we're thinking of building. Right? The detailed vision, the requirements for the property we're looking and hunting for, the skills, attitude, experience that we'd like to have when we carefully choose who we accept into this community. What are the incentives going to be that we'll put in place for fostering the right group dynamics and discouraging the wrong ones? What are the financial realities? All of that. So if you'd like to learn more about this specific relocation project, or if you'd like to integrate its insights into one of your own, check out part 2 of this report and join in the conversation. Love to have you as part of that. And if not, I know many of you are doing these sorts of exercises and efforts wherever you already happen to live. I've run into great people setting things up for themselves in Pennsylvania and Tennessee, Costa Rica, Australia. This is happening all over the place. So it's actually a movement, and love to have you as part of the tribe for that movement. Thank you for listening.